Well, hello there. I'm Father Roderick, and welcome to my review of the second episode of Season 7 of Star Wars The Clone Wars. The title is A Distant Echo, and I've got a few things to mention here about the storyline, about the animation, about things they added compared to the pre-visualized version that we've been able to watch a couple of years ago. And I would like to mention a number of things that some of you left in the comments on YouTube, and that gave some extra information about the first episode of Season 7 that I really wanted to share with you because it's some awesome feedback. So if you want to add some comments on what I mentioned in this episode, feel free to add it to the comments. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel. And well, let's dive into episode 2, A Distant Echo. So as I mentioned before, this is still based on those pre-visualizations of a story that was developed back when this season was in development a couple of years ago. However, this version, of course, is the final version with great animation. I still can't believe how much this series has advanced, especially in the character animation. It's so fluid. The camera angles are, in general, much better than in previous seasons. And there is a behind-the-scenes featurette on this episode and also on the previous episode. I totally missed that Star Wars was doing this, where they explain also, for instance, they talk about the lighting and that there is a specific person that is just there to light the scenes, and how much they improved that versus previous series or previous seasons. And there is also the camera guy, because of course, even though this is an animated series, there is a virtual camera that is filming everything. And what I totally missed, but what adds to the realism of these new episodes is, and the camera person explains this in the behind the scenes featurette, is that he tried to make sure that the virtual camera, the virtual lenses, corresponded to similar lenses that they would use if this had been a real life, a real action series, like, for instance, The Mandalorian. So if you zoom in, for instance, the background changes, the blurriness of the background, the bokeh effect changes. There is also lens aberration. All that stuff has been integrated into these virtual cameras that they're using. And that is why subconsciously you think, well, wow, this looks so much more real, even though it's clearly animation and all the characters are kind of cartoonish versions of their, real life characters. But it still affects your perception of this series, and it makes you go, well, wow, this is so, I don't know what's going on, but this feels so much better than what they've done in the past. Definitely check out those videos. I'll link to it in the show notes underneath this video. Let's talk about the story, and let's compare this to the version that we had already seen in its primitive pre-visualization version. There is one very important and crucial scene that was added to this episode, and that is, of course, the scene with Padme, this holo Skype connection that they have right before they dive into the action. Anakin says, well, there's still a little thing that I have to do, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and Rex has to cover for him while he gets in contact with Padme Amidala. Now, we saw this scene, or at least a glimpse of this scene, in the trailer, in the official trailer for Season 7. And back then, it spurred a lot of discussion, and there was quite a bit of discussion, also confusion among fans. So you could clearly see that Padme was in the early stages of her pregnancy, which made people a little bit confused as to when this scene would take place. I didn't expect it to be in the second episode, because as I mentioned, it wasn't in the original version. The reason that they added this is that they wanted to give Padme, and also the voice actress that plays Padme Amidala, they wanted to give her a role in this season, even if it was a little bit in the background, because I think for the rest of the season, Padme will not be involved in the story as far as I've been told, but maybe they changed that too. And so they decided to include this, I think, touching personal moment between Anakin and Padme right before the action starts. And I think it does a great job in making us realize that even though Anakin is all about action and taking, the lead, there's also this personal story that's going on. There's this relation in the background, and it ups the stakes. I mean, he's going to be the father of children. Well, we know that it's a twin. I don't think Anakin knows at the time. And so always when you have a family, even though nobody is aware of that, it puts the main character, Anakin in this case, in much more jeopardy, as in the case that it was just this lone ranger, this Jedi without any attachments. Actually, that is one of the reasons of the celibate life that Jedi are supposed to lead, and of course Anakin doesn't. It is to be free of these attachments so that you can maybe, sacrifice your life easier than if you have people to take care of. It's very similar, I think, to the celibate life that priests are called to live, where we're able to be put in many different situations. We can be moved from one place to another when that's good for the community, if it's good for the church. And I think that if I were married and I had children, my responsibilities would be different, and I had to divide my, let's say, my energy, my time, my dedication. I had to divide it up between the family, and I think family should always come first, and then church life. And I know from Protestant colleagues that actually that is a struggle. That and in most cases, the pastors from Protestant churches that I spoke with, they have a tendency to always let the work or the church or the community come first. And that is sometimes to the detriment of the children and of the family life in general. So they're actually, celibate life for Jedi makes sense. I'll get back to that a little bit later on. But first, let's get back to this confusion about this pregnancy. We can clearly see that she's pregnant, even by the way that she puts her hand on her belly. What the scene doesn't really tell us is if Anakin knows. And I don't know exactly. Maybe it's because the camera is looking at the scene from the side, so we see maybe a bit clearer that she's pregnant than if you would only see Anakin's perspective. He's looking straight at Amidala. It's a tense situation. He looks at her face. They have a conversation. Maybe he doesn't notice. It's a bit strange, but it's a possibility. This is still the early stage of the pregnancy. If he does see that she's pregnant, that would cause a lot of plot problems, because in the Revenge of the Sith, that is when he discovers that she's pregnant, and she is already in full pregnancy, and it's very clear that she is about to become a mom. And so I'm choosing to believe that in this situation, Anakin is not noticing. This does place these episodes, these four episodes around this storyline, very close actually to the events in the third prequel, because this is probably like 7 months before the twins are born. So we kind of have an idea where this is. What I don't know is if this messes up the chronology of this last season. So maybe these 4 stories are happening later than some of the story that we will see in season 7 later on. We don't know that for sure, because we do know the contents of this storyline, but we don't know what they have in store for us later on. A lot of that information is still, and that's going to be the big surprise of season 7. So we don't know if this season will be in constant chronology, like most of the previous seasons have been as well, or whether they will kind of mix it up a little bit, just because they first want to give us the storylines that we are already familiar with, and then surprise us with the conclusion of the story of the Clone Wars. Another thing that is a bit confusing about this scene is how well they get along. It's clearly a scene between 2 lovers, and Padme gives Anakin some, I think, very good advice. A lot of the things that she tells Anakin to take into account in his relation to Rex is actually advice that Anakin could have used later on in his own dilemmas that are quite similar to what Rex is facing right now. But what you don't feel here is tension or a breakup. Whereas in season 6, if you remember, the relationship between Anakin and Padme is in crisis. Padme is almost walking away from it, even though they're married in secret. But there is this huge confrontation between Anakin and this Clovis guy. And Clovis is definitely, I think, going over some boundaries. But at one point, he's prodding Padme. He wants to know, what's the status of what's the deal between you and Anakin? And then Padme, of course, because this has to be a secret, says, oh, there's nothing going on. It's definitely not romantic. And then Clovis is like, well, in that case, we can kiss. And, kind of forces her into a kiss. And that's when the doors open and Anakin is standing there and he's like, what the what? And he assaults Clovis and beats him. And then you see the dark side already at work in Anakin. So I really like those episodes, and I love this whole plot line. Anakin's rage against Clovis, because you see how much the love that he has for Padme is in a certain way maybe a little bit immature. He's very protective. Padme is his, and he almost gets blinded by that concern that maybe he's losing Padme, and so the moment he sees Clovis kiss or trying to kiss Padme, that's when I think something just completely breaks inside. There's a switch is flipped, and he lets the dark side flow through him. And the way he beats up Clovis is just shocking. And Padme is shocked, and so are we as a viewer. I really did not expect this in a series that is initially geared more towards younger kids. This is definitely really, really dark material. But that's where season 6 left us. Padme is just totally in distress and thinks that Anakin has gone way too far. And, well, this could have been the end of their relationship. And now in this episode, all is well. So maybe there is something that we don't know about, what happened in between those two episodes. Or maybe this will still be something that is happening later on in the season, or maybe they'll just leave it at the wayside. It all depends on how the chronology of this season will be. But it is a little bit weird. If you've just seen season 6 and then you see this, you're like, wait, what happened in between? But again, maybe there is just a time jump before we get to this particular story. Obi-Wan, that's another new revelation in this particular episode. Obi-Wan knows. He's totally aware that something is going on between Anakin and Padme, at least on the level of infatuation. Because, even though Rex and Anakin try to kind of hide it, Obi-Wan says, well, hey, I hope at least you said hi to Padme for me. How much has he really known? I'm thinking that Obi-Wan is aware of the feelings of Anakin. Anakin is pretty, transparent in that respect. And that there was something going on. Obi-Wan has already alluded to that in previous episodes of the Clone Wars as well. What I don't think is the case is that Obi-Wan knows that these two are engaged, that they have married, let alone that Padme is pregnant. I'm thinking that Obi-Wan is a bit lenient here because he knows what it is to be in love with a woman. And we've seen that with the leader of the Mandalore and his previous romance. And of course, later on, he kind of renounced to that love affair because he wanted to be a Jedi. And so in that respect, he knows what it is to be infatuated with someone, but he also knows that a true Jedi will give up on that, or at least will not follow up on those feelings because of the greater good of being a Jedi and trying to defend the galaxy. So I think that once Obi-Wan discovers what is truly going on between Anakin and Padme, and that basically it's been a charade, he's been hiding this from the Jedi Council, then you also understand Obi-Wan's distress, and maybe he's scandalized by that. Because having romantic feelings for someone, that is human. I mean, if I apply it to the life of priests, I know priests that have fallen in love after even being ordained. It doesn't make you immune all of a sudden to your feelings or infatuation or anything. But it's also, and that is why love is so multidimensional. If an infatuation doesn't mean you have to follow up on those feelings and start a romance and give up on your earlier commitments. The same is true for marriage. You know, you can be married to someone. It doesn't mean you don't have, sometimes you see a beautiful man or a beautiful woman and you become infatuated. But then hopefully you will choose to stick with your partner, stick with your engagement, your previous commitment. And the same is true for celibacy as well. Celibacy is a vow. It's not a magic formula that makes you immune to feelings. But it's always, that's why we have not just feelings and emotions in a heart, but we also have a brain. We can pray about this. We have a will, and our free will is not determined. It can be influenced, but it's not determined by our feelings. Thank goodness. If we only do what feels good, that's what children do, right? And adults, they may feel things, but they may choose to act differently. And so ultimately, it's all about sacrificing. Are you willing to let go of this romance or the romantic feelings that you have for someone for a greater goal, for the sake of your mission or your vocation as a Jedi? And that's, I think, where it goes wrong with Anakin. He hides this. He doesn't want to pay the price for this romantic relationship, and for, so he does it in secret. He hides part of who he is from his fellow Jedi, and in that respect he's not honest. And Padme isn't honest either. I mean, I'm not giving her a pass on this either. The both of them are having this forbidden love in a certain way. And it's not that love in itself is a bad thing, but in this case, the choices that Anakin and Padme have made are jeopardizing his role as a Jedi, and ultimately will put in jeopardy the entire galaxy, because it's because of this love that he has for Padme that he becomes vulnerable. And so, again, the Star Wars story gives us good reasons why the Jedi are celibate, and because otherwise they become vulnerable. They become a target, or maybe the family will become a target for the dark side. And so it makes the Jedi less available for what they're supposed to do, for their vocation. So Obi-Wan, he knows what's going on, but I don't think that he judges it to be more than just an infatuation or just a flirt. Well, he'll discover later that maybe he shouldn't have taken this so lightheartedly, and maybe his indignation, his anger when he discovers what's truly going on with Anakin, maybe part of his reaction is also that he's mad at himself. He knew, and he never confronted Anakin with the situation, never sat down for a talk, maybe because that was kind of awkward, because, well, Anakin knows that he himself had also been in love with, this lady from Mandalore. So maybe it's something that he hasn't come to terms with, and so he doesn't want to bring it up. If you can't be transparent and honest with each other, things may go out of whack. So that's an interesting. I love that they added this to this episode. And then they go to Skako Minor, this very dusty, yellowish planet. I wasn't totally convinced by the looks of it. It was a bit, yes, there's the sandstorm. That's, by the way, very Star Wars-like. I mean, there are some sandstorms, and sandstorms had been filmed. I think it was in Empire. It was definitely in Phantom Menace, and they cut it out anyway. And of course, in A New Hope, when they were filming A New Hope in Tunisia, a sandstorm completely destroyed the entire set. And if I'm not mistaken, something similar happened when they were trying to film The Force Awakens. I think they also had a sandstorm to deal with, which was seen as kind of like a good omen. Like, well, just like back in the olden days with George Lucas. So that's good, but the rest of the planet looked a bit meh, a bit I don't know, not as interesting visually. I like the kind of the dragon-like aliens and that sort of stuff. That was pretty menacing, well choreographed. The aliens, again. I like that they spoke a real alien language and there was no translation, and that actually becomes an important plot point. They don't understand these aliens, and so they assume that they're hostile, and so it almost became a deadly fight where these aliens would have died, and once they start to understand each other, then it becomes clear that, well, they're not actually hostile per se, but they just don't want this fight that's going on in the galaxy to, threaten their life on the planet. So this is also a good episode about how important communication is, and that you first have to listen and then make your decisions, instead of presuming that you know what the other party wants to do. I love the way in which they integrated tech, the one of the Bad Batch with this. And on his goggles, you see that he's got like a Star Wars version of Google Translate. Like on the left side, you see, I think it's the blue text, and then the translation appears in red, or vice versa. And like the one part of the glasses shows the original alien language, and then the other side you see the Star Wars translation, and it looks almost as if he's using Google Translate, and so of course he has to read that from the screen. It's kind of a little bit weird that there's no technology like Google has, where you could just vocalize it and some computer voice would read it. In this case, it's Tech himself who translates, and thereby avoids a confrontation between these two groups. So that was cool. I like the way that was just part of the techie things that this clone has to offer. And you don't need a protocol droid in this case, so no C-3PO necessary for translations. Actually, protocol droids may go obsolete. It had this technology been implemented everywhere in the galaxy, don't you think? Google Translate can translate as many languages as C-3PO, so I don't know. Did this technology get lost over time? Maybe that will be explored in one of those, expanded universe books or comics. So that's the first conflict that is averted. And then, of course, they are going to try to find the source of this signal. And Rex really hopes that it is Echo himself who is somehow the source of this signal. He is convinced that it is his brother, his clone brother, Echo. And so they ultimately end up in this, it's not really a city, but it's definitely like a bunch of tall buildings. They have to take an elevator to go all the way up. That's where, the bulky clone, what's his name, the Wrecker or something like that, shows that he's got a small heart, fierce exterior, but he's actually afraid of heights. All that was a little bit cliche. I was hoping for a little bit more development of the individual characters of the Bad Batch, but they remain kind of cartoonish video game characters. But, well, it doesn't really matter in this episode, but maybe something will happen later on. So they go up, and then they encounter new battle droids. That's another surprise, something that I didn't see coming. We see battle droids that sound like the classic battle droids, but they look very different and weird, just weird. There's this like more parts, and it's less their faces are just some technical parts, and it's a bit I don't know. I didn't see the advantage of this look or the way these droids were built. If it's just to shake up things visually, okay. But I think the scene would have worked just as well with the classic battle droids. But I don't know. By the way, if you have any comments or explanations why these battle droids look the way they look, let me know in the comments. I don't know much. I'm just sharing what I took note of in this episode. And then you get this dialogue, and that's the most interesting part of this episode, between Anakin and Rex. And of course, the dilemma is Rex at one point thinks that he needs to fight his fellow clones, the Bad Batch, to save his friend. And they don't want to go along with him because they've given up on Echo. Whereas for Rex, this is personal. This is very, very personal. He almost feels like he's part of the reason that Echo died, or at least, lost his life and got imprisoned maybe. And so for him, it's a very, very personal mission. And so because of this attachment that he has to Echo, maybe he doesn't make the right decision here. And so it's this conflict between his feelings and his moral obligation that he feels to go and save his friend. Even if there's just a remote possibility that Echo is still alive, he wants to go and save him. Whereas the Bad Batch is just making a tactical calculation, and well, this is just putting everything in jeopardy. And so you see how much that kind of obfuscates his reasoning. And then he has a conversation with Anakin, and Anakin is talking about that. And we all know what this scene kind of foreshadows. This is exactly the same conflict that Anakin will encounter later on, where his feelings for Padme will make him choose to turn against his friends and his allies. And from a good guy, he becomes actually a tool for the dark side. It's all because of this attachment to Padme. He wants to save Padme. And of course he fails, and he can't, and it was probably never possible for him to save Padme. But it becomes his downfall, this attachment. So it's a fine line, and here you see both sides. And of course we're all rooting for Echo, because the episode is called A Distant Echo, so you want this clone to be saved. And at the same time, you also here get a forewarning that this can also put in jeopardy other people, and it can be the cause of a breakup between allies. So that's interesting what they do here with the story. But of course, they go and ultimately find this strange sarcophagus almost. I love the design of this room where in the center you've got this big cigar-like shape. Also looks a bit like the contraption that was used to make Captain America. Remember, where he goes in as this very puny guy and then comes out as this bodybuilder. And so it's this capsule, and they figure out how to open it. And then this was a pretty horrific moment as well. Very well done, beautifully lit as well. Beautifully, scarily lit. Where this body just falls out, and it looks like almost like a Borg, with all sorts of tubes protruding from his head and his body, and he's ashen gray. And my first reaction was, he's actually dead. This is a corpse, and they're just keeping the brain alive. That was. But I was like, wow, how dramatic is this? And then there was a moment where I thought he's going to die. Or maybe he's actually dead. If they detach him, he's just going to die. And that would be very dramatic. But no, they chose a different storyline here. He awakes. He sees Rex and he's, oh, you came back for me. And where am I? And of course, he hasn't used his muscles, his legs, or his arms for maybe months or longer, so he's unable to walk. And this also reminded me of the scene in The Matrix where Neo wakes up. He takes the pill, and then all of a sudden he wakes up in this tube full of goo, and he's flushed, and once the tubes are detached from his body, he has to regrow his muscles for many weeks, and so I think that this scene was inspired by Neo, maybe also by the Borgs, but it works. It really works, and I don't think we've seen something like this ever before in the Star Wars narrative. So that was pretty cool, but also pretty scary. So now, of course, we don't know what's going to happen. But this storyline isn't finished yet. I think the episode that will be posted this week, and then the next episode that will kind of wrap up this storyline. And I'm also eager to know if this will have consequences for the rest of the season, or if this is a standalone story. I'm kind of secretly hoping that, well, I can hope that Echo returns. And I'm not sure, because I haven't seen Star Wars Rebels yet. I remember I've seen the first season and part of season 2, and I think that at one point they find actually they find Rex, but I'm not sure, is Echo there too? In that case, then of course it's obvious that he's going to recover, and then maybe we'll see him in the rest of the season. But let me know in the comments again, and I promise I will soon start to watch Rebels, because there are certain characters from the Clone Wars that will return in Rebels, and I just want to see how their storyline continues. Let's see, what else is there in my notes? Actually, I think that was kind of it. Yeah, the ending was kind of sudden. Like all of a sudden it was like boom, ta-doom, ta-doom, ta-doom. I was like, oh, okay. I was just in the middle of this story. So it didn't have a real good conclusion. It ends, of course, with the rescue of Echo, but then to me it was like I'm waiting for like an afterthought or something to kind of nicely wrap this up, and then instead it's like all of a sudden it ends. A bit sudden. Well, anyway, there will be a new episode before we know it. Then, after this, I want to go to some of your comments, because there was some awesome information in some of the comments that you left me on YouTube. And I just want to quickly go through them and share it with you in case you haven't had time to read those comments. First of all, Joseph has a very good extra piece of information. And he says, the animated pre-visualizations that were used for the storyboarding of these episodes, this is actually what inspired Jon Favreau's character in the Mandalore arc. So Jon Favreau voices this Mandalore guy, and his name is Pre-Vizsla. Pre-Vizsla. Vizsla or Vizsla? I don't know. Pre-Vizsla. And that, of course, is just a play on the word pre-visualization. And then later on in The Mandalorian, Jon Favreau, at least everybody assumes that that's the case, plays this Mandalorian who also is a relative of this Pre-Vizsla character. So that's really kind of a very nerdy joke, but that's kind of, Star Wars has done a lot of these things with like Newt Gunray was like a politician that they kind of changed the name, or there were lots of little jokes in the names that you will find in the Star Wars stories. I think actually Newt Gunray wasn't that from Reagan? Like, I don't know. Again, I'm sure that some of you are more knowledgeable than I am. So if you know of any of those names that are actually wordplays, and please share it with us in the comments. Q Voss writes, we have to thank George, Dave, and all the workers behind the scenes, like the voice actors and the animation team. George and Dave is what made this series work and made it come to life. Lots of people don't like to admit that George Lucas was hands deep in this series, and even Dave Filoni has said many times that this was the case. Just recently, a couple of days ago, in fact, Dave Filoni has said that the reason he's only doing 12 episodes and not finishing the 40-plus episodes that were left is because he doesn't want to do it without George. I had no idea that they had storylines for 40-plus episodes. Now I feel a little bit sad that we only get 12. But I can also understand that well, if you don't have that chemistry with George, I don't know. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame that we'll never get to see those storylines. Or maybe they will just reuse it like they've used, I think, some of the story arcs for Darth Maul, for instance, in one of the novels. This also joins another comment that was posted by G1138, good THX reference there, where he says Ahsoka can be seen leading her battalion in her novel of the same name. So remember that in one of the previous episodes, I said that in the trailer you see this battalion of clone troopers, and the painting on their helmets mirrors the patterns on Ahsoka's face. And so I was like, wow, that is so cool. She's commanding her own group of clones. And so apparently this is also something that they integrated in the novel, and maybe that was based on some story threads that they decided not to develop for Clone Wars. Sargine Troll 81 writes, before the next episode of Season 7 comes out, I would highly recommend watching the first 4 episodes of Season 6, since that leads directly into the first arc of Season 7. It has some really important events. Well, I did that. Thank you so much for that recommendation. And Season 6 was actually surprisingly good for what I thought was just, some loose ends that they just decided to put in a season because, well, they were running out of time because of the Disney merger. But Season 6 was cool. The Yoda story was awesome too. I will record reviews for all the other seasons that I haven't reviewed on YouTube yet. So that's 3, 4, 5, and 6. But I first want to focus on this season. And then the final comment is, I pinned that in the comment section on YouTube because it was so awesome. This is the best one that I wanted to share with you, and it's from TWSTF8. Something that I've noticed people are missing is that the reason they called in Clone Force 99, the Bad Batch, is because the CIS was managing to achieve quite substantial amounts of success using the tactics of the clone army against them. And so the Bad Batch was necessary because they did not adhere to those predictable strategies. In other words, they didn't just bring them in to show some strange or interesting variations of clone troopers for its own sake, but there was a very fundamental purpose for their appearance that ties directly into the underlying narrative of the arc. If you've become so predictable that your enemy has begun winning by anticipating your strategies, it's essentially imperative that you bring in a team that is not bound by them at all. The Bad Batch has their own tactics, their own bags of tricks, and tactics the Separatists are virtually unaware of. And so what they've been using to their advantage is rendered completely meaningless. So it's brilliant storytelling. I totally agree with you. And then he continues, this is also another reason that we need Dave Filoni to be kept at Lucasfilm in some kind of protective hyperbaric chamber or something like that. These are great storylines. I did not realize, but that totally ties into the main story of these 4 episodes. And then he continues, he or she actually, I can't see from the screen name. Besides George Lucas himself and obviously Dave Filoni, Henry Gilroy and Christian Taylor, some of the later episode arcs were entirely written by George Lucas's daughter, Katie Lucas. When I read that, I was like, what? I've never seen any of the extras. I've only got the Season 1 DVD box. And so I was not aware that Katie Lucas actually wrote storylines for Star Wars. How cool is that? And why don't they advertise that more? That's awesome. So she wrote Sphere of Influence, Jedi Crash, Assassins. Or is it Jedi Crash? Or I don't know. It's like my list is a little bit. Let me read it from this list. So Jedi Crash, Assassins, Night Sisters. One of the best episodes of the entire series. Monster, Witches of the Mist, Massacre, Bounty, Brothers, Revenge, The Unknown, Conspiracy, Fugitive, Orders. So the Night Sisters and the Darth Maul Savage Opress stories were written by Katie Lucas. I love that storyline. It's so cool. And she also wrote the original teleplay and foreword to Dark Disciple. Cool. So it wasn't just Dave Filoni and George Lucas and the story group table and Henry Gilroy. Many of the more prominent and profound episodes and story arcs were created wholly by a few creative people, including the daughter of George Lucas. That's my point. It's the little unknown stuff, the little known stuff, unless you've immersed yourself in some of the background making of materials for the show. Some of you have written me that quite a few of those making of segments are also available on YouTube. So I'll probably have to dive into YouTube and see if I can find some of those, because this is fascinating. And now actually I'm intrigued, and I'm wondering, well, if they're still thinking about developing new Star Wars movies, why haven't they involved her in writing a plot for the story? Or maybe, you know, that they discarded George Lucas's ideas for the sequel movies, and George Lucas was quite distressed by that. Maybe give her a try. Let her work it out with her dad. Maybe they'll come up with something that works. I don't know. The more ideas, the merrier. They can always decide not to do anything with it, but why not involve her in developing some new storylines? Or maybe she already is. Who knows? We don't know everything that's happening behind the scenes. All right, that's it for this review. A little bit later than usual. I've had a tremendously busy week. Hopefully this wasn't too long-winded. Sometimes I kind of lose track of what I'm saying. So if you're still watching this, thank you so much. And please like, subscribe, and leave a comment as well. I love having this discussion, and if you have additional information or thoughts about this episode, I'll make sure to integrate it in my review of episode 3, which is I'm recording this the day before it will be available in my part of the world. So I'm really eager to see where they take this story. Thank you so much for watching. Talk to you later, and may the Force be with you.